After a reserved black girl experiences severe bullying at her new school, no one intervenes until her father, a man with a concealed past he's long tried to keep hidden, resolves to speak out. Imani Reddick stood near the side entrance of Halston Middle School, clutching her backpack strap until her fingers hurt. She didn't cry. That wasn't her way. She remained silent, her chin slightly lowered, observing the stream of students who didn't even acknowledge her. She had discovered that remaining unnoticed could offer more protection than being visible. Mobile, Alabama, was not her home. Her home was Savannah, or at least it had been, that old brick apartment with the broken mailbox and the familiar smell of fried fish every Sunday. But her father insisted they needed a fresh beginning. Consequently, they were now living in a duplex with 2 white walls and neighbors who offered no greetings. Her initial week at Halston High had been largely uneventful. The teachers were courteous, her coursework was within her abilities, and the cafeteria food was acceptable. Children possessed a remarkable ability to detect subtle shifts, much like dogs identifying fear. Imani rarely spoke unless necessary. Her father often remarked that her voice carried weight, and she avoided using it for casual conversation. Her hair was styled in precise twists. Her shoes were polished, and her clothes were neatly pressed. She presented a simple, intelligent appearance, avoiding anything ostentatious, simply careful. She actively avoided drawing attention to herself. However, on Thursday, attention sought her out regardless. She walked along the B Hall corridor, on her way to science class, when a tall boy with sunburned cheeks and a smug look blocked her path. "Hey," he said, tilting his head like a puppy feigning friendliness. "You don't talk much, do you?" Imani blinked at him, uncertain if it was a question or a challenge. "What's wrong?" he pressed. "Are you too good to say hi?" She replied softly, attempting to move past. He shifted aside and bumped her shoulder, causing her to stumble slightly. "Chill out." She simply acknowledged him. He didn't respond, continuing his walk, his heartbeat quickening unexpectedly. His name was Tyler McHale. She discovered this later during gym class, when he erupted in laughter during a basketball game and called another student slow as hell, a comment audible to everyone in the room. The other boys joined in his laughter. Even the coach remained largely silent. Tyler McHale was known for a certain behavior, though it was rarely spoken of directly. He belonged to that category of children best left undisturbed, especially if you valued tranquility. Imani recognized the pattern. He possessed the hallmarks: boisterous, presumptuous, and exhibiting a subtle cruelty that often escaped adult observation. That evening, at their residence, her father posed the customary inquiry. "How was school, dear?" She responded with a slight lift of her shoulders. "Okay. Anyone causing you difficulties?" She denied it with a headshake. Darius Reddick scrutinized her expression. His gaze was penetrating. It didn't gloss over details. She held his gaze for a moment, then averted her eyes and began to play with her fork. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" he said. "I know." She didn't elaborate. He didn't press. He always respected boundaries. That's what he's taught her since she was little. A reserved child isn't fragile. They're simply waiting for the appropriate moment to share. Imani hoped that principle still applied. But the atmosphere of Halston was altered. This wasn't Savannah. This wasn't the neighborhood where Miss Charlene looked after her when her dad worked late, or where Mr. Jalen across the street gave her peppermints on Sundays. This place didn't feel like it had people, just moving pieces. On Friday, Tyler walked past her in the lunch line and accidentally knocked her tray sideways. Chicken tenders and mashed potatoes hit the floor. "Oh, my bad," he said with a smirk. "Didn't see you there." Some kids laughed. Others looked away. The cafeteria monitor hardly looked up. Imani crouched to gather the tray, her cheeks flushed but her expression unreadable. She remained silent, simply tidying up and moving to the rear of the queue. Tyler departed as if everything was normal. However, it was significant, especially for her. But that was only the start, and the most difficult moments were still to come. By the second week, the cafeteria event felt like an introduction. Tyler had made it his purpose. Imani didn't understand why. Perhaps it stemmed from her lack of visible reaction compared to others. Or maybe because she didn't appear afraid, despite feeling it. Regardless, Tyler perceived this as a challenge. Initially, it manifested as hushed comments behind her in the hallway. This escalated to staged applause when she responded to questions in class. Following her excellent score on an English pop quiz, he publicly questioned, what's she attempting to demonstrate? Trying to be the teacher's favorite or something. During gym class one day, she was the last person chosen for teams. Tyler, positioned beside the student selecting players, whispered, she probably doesn't even sweat like the rest of us, but she thinks she's too good to stink. He spoke loud enough for 3 other boys to overhear. They laughed. Imani didn't respond. Her lack of reaction served as her shield. However, silence can sometimes exacerbate the situation. By Wednesday, the conflict escalated to physical actions. One morning, she entered class to discover someone had written "mute monkey" across her desk in pencil. She paused, studying the words briefly, before retrieving her eraser. Her hand moved deliberately as she erased. She detected muffled laughter nearby. Later that afternoon, in the hallway, Tyler passed by and murmured, "Better get used to it." That evening, she returned home with a torn strap on her backpack. Her father immediately observed the damage. "What happened?" Darius inquired. "It got caught in the locker hinge," she replied. He remained silent, not meeting her gaze, for a significant pause. Then, in a measured tone, he asked, "You sure about that?" She confirmed with a nod. "Yeah." Darius observed her for a few more seconds, his expression strained. He rose, proceeded to the kitchen, and opened a drawer. Returning with an antique sewing kit, he began to mend the strap while she sat at the table, feigning study. The quiet returned. It wasn't oppressive, just commonplace. She understood he was hesitant. She also recognized he would wait however long she required. A tightness began to build within her, feelings she couldn't articulate. Friday proved to be particularly difficult. During lunchtime, Tyler positioned himself directly across from her, without an invitation or a tray, simply offering a smile. "You don't enjoy conversation, do you?" he remarked, tapping the table with his fingers. "Are you one of those peculiar individuals? Do you believe yourself superior to others?" Imani continued eating, deliberately slow, bite after bite. "I asked you a question," he stated, raising his voice. "Or are you too unintelligent to respond?" Those nearby began to observe the exchange. Several phones were unavailable. Imani glanced up at last. "No," she stated. "No what?" she asked. "I don't believe I'm improved. I simply dislike waste." Immediately after the words were spoken, a plate of spaghetti launched from the periphery. It struck her chest, coating her shirt with red sauce and onto her lap. Amusement rang out. She rose deliberately, making no effort to clean the sauce, simply fixing her gaze on Tyler. His eyes widened, not with fear, merely with surprise. The lunch monitor arrived, predictably late. "What happened?" she asked, her expression already frustrated. Imani remained silent, instead choosing to gather her tray and proceed to the closest trash can. Sauce dripped, and her shirt was stained. Her heart pounded in her chest. That night, she skipped dinner. Her father knocked twice on her door before entering. She was seated on the floor, altering the shirt in her sketch pad, drawing thick black lines over what used to be white cotton. "Baby girl," he said quietly. She didn't answer. He came and sat beside her. "I've been keeping my peace," he said, "trying to let you breathe, give you time. But I know something's going on, and I ain't the type to just sit back while my daughter's hurting." She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "I can handle it." "I know you can," he said. However, that shouldn't necessarily be the case. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was how near things were to spiraling out of control. It happened the following Tuesday. The school day felt long and tiresome. Imani kept her head down, remained in the back of classrooms, and avoided the cafeteria entirely. She learned which bathrooms were usually empty, which hallways had working cameras, and which ones didn't. However, you can't account for everything. Following sixth period, she was walking along the east hallway. The walls were bare, the lockers were damaged, and there was little movement. Her backpack felt unusually heavy, not due to books, but from the burden she carried within. feelings of anger, shame, and a nameless sensation that lingered behind her eyes, occasionally causing them to sting without explanation. Then she detected it, the sound of footsteps behind her. Rapid. She didn't look back, simply increasing her pace. However, a sudden shove followed. Forceful. Her shoulder impacted the metal lockers. Her bag slipped from her arm and landed on the floor. "What's your problem, freak?" Tyler's voice echoed behind her, too loud for the space. Imani turned slowly, breathing through her nose. "I'm not bothering you," she said. "Do you think you can disrespect me in front of everybody and get away with it?" He stepped closer. "Go away, Tyler. Or what? I'll tell someone." He grinned. "Like who? Those teachers that don't even look at you? Please." Imani didn't move, didn't blink. Tyler looked down, then abruptly reached for her backpack. She moved to obstruct him. A misjudgment. He pushed her again, this time using both hands. She stumbled. Her shoe snagged on the wall trim, and her head impacted the corner of the locker with a muted, unpleasant sound. She fell to the floor, as if her supports had been severed. A moment of stillness followed. Even Tyler recoiled slightly. Imani remained motionless. Blood began to trickle down the side of her face, a single streak across her cheek. A janitor located down the hall abruptly rounded the corner. His mop stopped in its motion. "Hey, what is happening?" he exclaimed, hurrying toward the scene. Tyler ran. The ambulance arrived in just minutes. The principal appeared suddenly, with a phone in hand, a worried tone of voice, and a visibly pale expression. The quiet moment they had previously afforded Tyler had vanished. By the time Darius received the notification, Imani was already at Springdale Medical Center. A nurse informed him that she was awake but required stitches. She sustained a mild concussion and had swelling on the left side of her face. He remained silent. He entered her room, his eyes carefully observing every detail, as if committing it to memory. She appeared smaller in the hospital bed. Not delicate, merely smaller than he recalled. She turned her head slowly upon seeing him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. That was what affected him deeply. "Don't," he said, kneeling beside the bed. "Don't apologize." Her lips trembled. "You instructed me to inform you when I required your presence. I am here now," he stated. He remained still. He sat with her for hours. He barely blinked. Nurses came and went. At one point he asked one of them, gently, how many times the school had called about incidents with Imani. The nurse looked at her chart, then looked back at him. The answer was none. He stared straight ahead after that. When they finally got home, Imani went straight to bed. Darius didn't. He sat in the dark at the kitchen table, hands folded, eyes locked on a spot on the wall. He rose, proceeded to the rear closet, and retrieved an aged shoebox. The contents were innocuous. No weapons were present. No firearms. No blades. Only a folded sheet of paper, a photograph of a man he hadn't seen in 10 years, and a telephone number penned in diminishing blue ink. He examined it intently. Subsequently, he grasped the telephone and initiated a call. "Hello?" A voice responded. "It's me," Darius stated. A pause ensued. "Didn't expect to ever hear from you. I require information." "Regarding what?" "A boy. Caucasian. 13 years old. Tyler McHale." A mobile phone notification. A moment of silence. What is the meaning of this? He had admitted my daughter to the hospital. A lengthy pause followed. Then, one day prior, Darius terminated the call. He remained motionless, suspended in quiet. A part of him, long suppressed and deeply concealed, began to react. It wasn't anger, not even aggression, simply heightened awareness. However, making a call of that nature meant inviting consequence. And once a path was opened, unwelcome elements often entered, difficult to retract. 15 years ago, Darius Reddick was recognized under a different identity. In Savannah, the name Deke commanded attention. He wasn't boisterous, nor did he act impulsively, yet he consistently achieved his objectives. His methods were subtle, a quietness that instilled unease. Debts were settled, and disappearances were understood, thanks to him. He avoided direct violence, except in matters close to him, which were infrequent. Deke didn't seek a leadership role. He shunned the public eye. He positioned himself just behind those in power, and that's where true influence resided. But then Marissa became pregnant. Marissa wasn't living on the streets. She was pursuing her education to become a nurse. She was known for her beauty, directness, and intelligence. When she informed Darius they were expecting a child, a change occurred within him. He began to contemplate his lasting impact. He thought about what his daughter would perceive when she looked at him. He worried about the number of falsehoods it would require to conceal his true identity from her. Marissa did not survive the delivery. A tragic accident occurred. A rainy night, a drunk driver. She was gone, suddenly. Without warning, Darius was left with only a 5-pound baby girl who inherited her mother's eyes. Following this, he vanished, abandoning Savannah. He severed connections, sold the vehicles, concealed the cash, destroyed the phone, and relocated to smaller towns, securing unassuming jobs and maintaining a solitary existence. For 14 years, he erased himself from view, all for Imani. However, the phone call he initiated that night, after observing her at the hospital, marked the beginning of the unraveling. The individual he contacted, Terrence Bug Nichols, was not a friend. Not really. More like someone utilized when results were needed without interference. 3 days after the call, Bug sent a message. Tyler McHale, son of Curtis McHale, was with Mobile PD. Curtis ran a side job for a while, moving product through impounded vehicles. He was caught 5 years ago, but avoided conviction on a technicality. He still wears the badge. Still corrupt. Darius considered this information. He did not desire vengeance. This was not about harming a child. Understanding that his father was a man who abused his authority to manipulate people was a different matter. It suggested Tyler was acting aggressively because he's avoided repercussions. Someone had instilled in him the belief that there would be no accountability. This ignited a deep anger within Darius, an anger he hadn't felt in a considerable time. He drove across town that night. He parked a few blocks from an old warehouse by the train yard. He knocked once, then twice slow. Bug answered. His face appeared older. His body seemed thicker. But those eyes, still cold. Thought you were out for good. Bug said. I was. Bug gestured for him to come inside. So what changed? Darius looked around. Metal shelves. Old crates. A faint hum of radio static in the corner. I need to scare somebody. Bug raised an eyebrow. Scare. I want the message to land, but no blood. Bug chuckled. That ain't your usual style. I'm not that man anymore. Bug looked at him for a long second, then nodded. All right, I got someone who owes me. Real discreet. Ex-military. Now works security. He will leave a note they will remember. No threats. No harm. Just presence, Darius stated. Bug grinned. You want to haunt the man. Precisely. 2 days later, Curtis McHale returned home to discover his front door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing was stolen. However, every drawer had been opened, and his framed awards were placed face down. A single Polaroid photo rested on his recliner, an image of Curtis from 5 years ago, hands cuffed, head down, flanked by officers. On the back, a simple sentence. If anything happens to my child again, yours is next. Curtis failed to report the incident. He understood the protocol. This was not something you concealed. During that same week, Tyler ceased attending school. There was no official notification. No farewell. Imani observed his absence, but remained silent. She returned to her classes, head held high, quiet, but no longer concealed. However, Darius recognized that revisiting the past doesn't always allow it to settle. Occasionally, it resurfaces with anger. The house phone rang shortly after 11:30 p.m. Darius seldom answered calls from numbers he didn't recognize, but a feeling compelled him to answer. He remained silent, simply waiting. A low, familiar, and dry voice spoke. You made noise, Deke. Darius paused before responding. Then he requested silence, just a presence. The voice emitted a chuckle. Yeah, well, some presence echoes louder than you think. Darius gripped the phone more firmly. Who is this? The voice inquired. You remember Devin Mars? That name caused a sharp, uncomfortable feeling in his throat. Devin Mars had previously worked as a problem solver in Savannah. Uncompromising, precise, and driven by ambition. Darius had wronged him several years prior when Mars threatened someone Darius valued. The incident concluded with a tense confrontation that was never discussed. Until now, he currently resides in Pensacola, involved in real estate, nightclubs, and politics. His child attends Halston Prep. Rumors suggest he's become aware of your name once more, and he's displeased. Darius leaned back in his chair, the kitchen clock ticking behind him like a countdown. I'm no longer part of that world. Then why was your name being circulated again? Click. The line disconnected. For the next hour, Darius remained silent. His thoughts raced. Devin Mars did not forgive, and he did not forget. If his name was being passed around, that meant others were paying attention as well. It wasn't just about Tyler anymore. It was about what people believed Darius might become again. The mere thought of it made his stomach churn. He recalled Imani, how she used to fall asleep on his chest. She remembered how she'd learned to walk with her arms out like wings. He'd promised her a different life, a quiet one. But quiet wasn't always safe. At school, people noticed Imani was walking a little taller. She didn't smile much, but her silence now felt different, less like retreat, more like strength. Her teacher, Miss Kendrick, pulled her aside after class. I just want to say I'm sorry we didn't do more. We should have, she said. Imani looked her in the eye. I am not relying on others to act appropriately anymore. Miss Kendrick stopped. You possess more strength than you realize. However, strength was insufficient on its own. On that Friday, a black SUV with tinted windows arrived outside the school precisely as the final bell sounded. The vehicle was not the property of a parent, and it remained parked. Imani observed it. A feeling, not of fear but of familiarity, churned in her stomach. She didn't know who was inside, but she had seen a car like that previously, back in Savannah. Following her grandmother's funeral, she informed her father that evening. Darius didn't inquire. He simply moved to the rear room and retrieved a phone from a drawer. Instead of contacting Bug, he dialed another number. A woman answered, her voice raspy, reminiscent of gravel and whiskey. It's been a long time, Deke. Too long, Tanya. I heard you went soft. I did on purpose, he replied. She chuckled once. That's good, but now you're calling. I need eyes on a vehicle. A black SUV with Florida license plates was parked outside Halston Middle School. A moment of silence followed. Then, a voice said, I'll have something for you tomorrow. That night, Darius remained near Imani's bedroom door. This wasn't due to a lack of faith in the locks. It was simply the spot where he felt most at ease. The following day, Tanya returned the call. The vehicles are connected to Mars nightclub. They are not registered in his name, but his driver utilizes them. Imani's school is not part of his typical route. Darius took a deep breath. He is currently not taking any action. He was either sending a message or anticipating one from you. That afternoon, Darius drove to Pensacola. There were no weapons and no threats. Only an old envelope containing a picture of Marissa, Imani's mother. He gave it to the security guard at Mars Club. He instructed the guard to tell Deke that this was now the only thing that mattered, and that if anything happened to her, he would not engage in conversation. The guard remained silent, accepting the envelope and retreating as if it were hazardous material. Darius did not wait for acknowledgement and returned home in silence. When individuals such as Mars are provoked, they do not allow the matter to drop. They identify vulnerabilities, and Darius possessed one. It began with a package. Small, plain, without a return address. It was sitting on Darius's porch 2 mornings after his trip to Pensacola. He understood he should not touch it immediately. He examined it, studied the corners. There were no wires. There was no unusual weight. Nevertheless, he opened it outdoors, cautiously, using a pocket knife he hadn't used in years. Inside was a USB drive. Nothing else. He brought inside. He connected it to the older laptop he's kept isolated from network. The screen displayed a solitary video file. It was labeled property. He initiated playback. Grainy security camera footage from a grocery store parking lot appeared. Imani was visible near the front entrance, using her phone. Then a figure entered the scene. He didn't approach her. He didn't speak. He simply stood across the lot facing her, watching. Subsequently, he walked away. The camera followed his movement. He was a white man, with a shaved head, wearing a blue jacket. A face Darius recognized. An old Mars enforcer. Still alive, it seemed. No warning had been given. None was necessary. The meaning was unmistakable. We could contact her whenever we pleased. Darius shut the laptop and remained motionless for a considerable time. Afterward, he entered the bathroom and studied his reflection. He no longer resembled Deke. The beard was flecked with gray. His hands appeared heavier than before. Yet something within him, something cold and sharp, remained untouched. He picked up the phone and initiated one last call. "It's important that they all be present," he stated. 3 hours later, he found himself in the back room of a car shop in Foley. 5 men were seated around him. Each possessed a history they hadn't documented. "Tell me why we're here," one of them inquired. "They threatened my daughter," Darius responded. There was no request for verification. His delivery wasn't challenged. "They intend to intimidate me into submission, but I've remained silent for 14 years. That's sufficient." "So what's the plan?" Darius asked, leaning forward. "We avoid direct confrontation. We pursue the underlying causes. Every man Mars is connected to is exposed. We illuminate them. Their records, their deals, their back channels. We leak everything." "You trying to destroy him?" Darius stated. "I'm reminding him that just because I walked away doesn't mean I forgot how to play." The men nodded. Over the next 3 days, Darius orchestrated a quiet demolition. Public records were sent to journalists. Photos were sent to wives. Hidden accounts were reported to the IRS. One of Mars' clubs suddenly got flagged for health code violations. Yet another establishment lost its liquor license abruptly. The process was handled discreetly and legally. However, the implications were unmistakable. By Friday, the SUV ceased appearing at Imani's school. Mars became silent. There was no retaliation, no communication, but the situation remained unresolved. That evening, Imani returned from school and discovered Darius at the kitchen table with the envelope from the club placed before him. She sat opposite him. For the first time, she inquired, "What did you used to do?" He regarded her for a prolonged period. Then he responded, "I engaged in actions I regret, actions that instilled fear in people, actions that ensured our sustenance." She acknowledged this slowly. "And now I'm striving to become someone different." She paused. "But you reverted to those actions to safeguard me." "I reverted to protect you from those who disregard the established guidelines. Not out of desire, because it was necessary." She remained silent for a moment. "I wish to no longer experience fear," she stated finally. He reached across the table. "You're not anymore." They remained seated for a while. As evening approached, no elaborate words were needed. It was a moment of shared understanding between two people. The following week at school, Imani offered to read her essay in English class. Her voice was steady. The essay explored courage, not the dramatic kind seen in films, but the courage to appear regardless, to speak even when hesitant, and to remain upright despite external pressure. Following the class, Ms. Kendrick offered a subtle smile, conveying a sense of pride. Imani returned the gesture, a quiet but genuine expression. Darius understood that peace achieved in this manner invariably demanded a price. He only hoped he had paid sufficiently. Spring arrived in Mobile Sutley that year. The trees bordering the schoolyard became vibrant and lush, and the days extended slightly. It had been nearly 2 months since Imani had last seen Tyler McHale's face. She never learned precisely what had transpired with him. Speculation circulated. He transferred schools. His dad took a leave. His family relocated. However, no one provided verification, and Imani had no desire to inquire. Her attention was now directed elsewhere. When Northwood High School announced the annual student-led assembly, Ms. Kendrick urged Imani to participate, to do more than simply attend, to speak. Initially, she felt unsure. However, something within her changed. A form of understated bravery emerged. It wasn't boisterous or flamboyant, but resolute, much like herself. Consequently, she registered. On the day of the event, as her name was announced, the gym grew almost silent. Teachers leaned forward. Students ceased their whispers. Imani walked to the podium with her hands at her sides. Her notes were folded in one pocket, untouched. She surveyed the crowd. Rows of students who had once laughed at her now ignored her or simply averted their gaze. And she began. My name is Imani Reddick. A few months ago, I wished no one would know my name. I didn't want to be noticed. I believed that staying quiet would keep me safe. She paused. But silence doesn't always guarantee safety. Occasionally, it merely renders you unseen by those who could offer assistance. It was painfully obvious to those who intended harm. Several people looked my way, and some averted their gaze. I experienced bullying. It wasn't due to any action on my part, simply because I didn't align with someone else's preconceived notion of how I should appear. It was a painful experience, and it diminished my sense of self. She briefly looked towards the back of the gym, where Darius stood partially obscured, with his arms crossed, observing her. However, I realized that silence does not equate to strength. Understanding when and to whom it's important to speak. That is strength. I believed I needed to manage everything independently. I was mistaken. She averted her gaze, then returned her attention upwards. I now have an advocate for me, not simply offering verbal support, but demonstrating tangible assistance. And I want every person present to acknowledge this, particularly those who have felt as I once did. You are not obligated to face challenges alone. The initial response was silence, a pause where the words resonated powerfully and truthfully. Then, a single clap broke the stillness. It was followed by others, until the room was filled with applause. Imani moved forward without a smile. It wasn't necessary. Her words carried the impact. Following the assembly, several students came to speak with her. They were subdued and showed deference. Many simply expressed their gratitude. Others offered their apologies. A few inquired about spending time together. She paused, considering her response. That evening, back at home, Darius prepared grilled chicken on the patio. The aroma of charcoal and sweet onions filled the air. Imani sat close by, her knees drawn to her chest, observing the dancing flames. Did you truly mean what you expressed? Darius questioned. He flipped the meat once. Then he glanced at her. Your mother. She used to speak like that. Imani smiled. You think she'd be pleased? I know she would. A silence followed. She'd also say I'm allowing you to mature too quickly, he added. Imani laughed once. You sort of are. He chuckled. I suppose we're both learning. Later, as the sun dipped behind the houses, they sat in quietness. Not the kind they used to carry around like armor. This quietness was different, lighter. Imani didn't require her father to be flawless. Her need was simply for his presence. And Darius, acknowledging all he had done and all he had concealed, understood that safeguarding her didn't invariably involve burying the past. Occasionally, it meant accepting responsibility for it, so she wouldn't have to. Existence rarely offers a complete escape from sources of pain. Yet it provides a choice. Remain silent, or voice your truth. Walk independently, or accept another support. Imani opted to speak, and Darius chose to listen. This is how they found healing. As a united front. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to see more. Each story we share explores authentic choices, real people, and the resilience needed to progress, regardless of your beginnings. A judge chuckled upon hearing that 17-year-old Naomi was representing her cousin in court, but the entire courtroom fell silent by the time she concluded her statement. The courtroom held a subtle aroma of coffee and aged floor polish. Fluorescent lights hummed above as Naomi Ellison proceeded through the double doors, holding a substantial manila folder close. Her walk was determined, though it was evident she had practiced it before a mirror. Her thrift store slacks were a little too short, the white shirt just slightly wrinkled, and her bun, braided tight and pinned, had loosened a little in the Georgia humidity. Despite this, she kept her head high. 17 years old, not a lawyer, not even a college student, she was present to defend her cousin, and she wasn't planning on being dismissed. It was late morning in the Berrien County Courthouse in Nashville, Georgia, a modest building where everyone knew everyone. This was not a courtroom known for dramatic proceedings. It typically handled minor traffic offenses, small claims, and occasional custody disputes. Judge Byron Talcott had served on the bench for almost 3 decades. People in town remarked that he seemed from an earlier era, a diplomatic way of noting his resistance to change and his limited acceptance of it within his courtroom. As Naomi announced her role as Deshaun Little's legal representative, Judge Talcott peered over his glasses, appearing bewildered. "You're what now?" he inquired, looking down at the docket. "I'm representing my cousin in this case," Naomi stated, her voice unwavering. "I prepared a written argument, and—" He interrupted her. "You're not a lawyer," he said, a slight laugh escaping his lips. A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. It seemed impossible that she was young enough to drive, let alone practice law. Several individuals adjusted their positions to observe her more closely. A man seated in the rear even smiled, seemingly anticipating an amusing spectacle. Naomi remained composed. Her expression didn't change, and her hands were steady. She nodded once, opened her documents, and stated, with respect, "Your Honor, Georgia law permits individuals to represent others in non-criminal proceedings, provided both parties agree." Judge Talcott raised an eyebrow. "And you're telling me he consents to this?" Deshaun, seated beside her in jeans and a t-shirt, leaned toward the microphone. "Yes, sir, I do." A subtle change permeated the atmosphere. Naomi cleared her throat and added, "I'm prepared to proceed if the court is willing." The judge reclined in his chair, pausing for an extended moment. Then he smirked and waved his hand dismissively. "Fine. This will be interesting." The bailiff, an older man named Wiggins, inclined himself forward a little, focusing his gaze on Naomi with a hint of curiosity rather than disapproval. Naomi organized her documents with precision. She positioned her handwritten notes before her, turning to the page marked Opening Statement. Her script was precise, so precise that it seemed impossible anyone could have written it hastily. As she prepared to speak, a laugh escaped someone situated in the back of the room. The judge made no move to quiet it, nor did Naomi. She simply commenced. Before she could elaborate further, the judge interrupted her once more. "Miss Ellison, for the sake of argument, could you please state where you obtained your law degree?" She met his gaze steadily. "I do not possess one, but I have dedicated the past 2 years to studying Georgia traffic law, civil procedure, and judicial conduct during my leisure time. I've attended public hearings in 3 counties, transcribed trial footage, and reviewed over 50 court opinions. I do not possess a degree, but I am present to ensure the court's time is used productively." The room was silent now. Even the clerk had ceased typing. However, Judge Talcott still had one more maneuver prepared. Judge Talcott exhaled audibly through his nose, seemingly considering whether this was a misuse of time or an opportunity for spectacle. He shifted slightly in his chair and offered Naomi a brief, dismissive gesture. "Very well, Miss Ellison." Naomi remained unfazed. She delivered her introduction with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed it repeatedly. And she had. In her bedroom, she practiced, standing before a mirror with her backpack used as a makeshift podium. Her voice remained steady as she presented the details. Deshaun had been stopped by police for failing to stop at a stop sign outside the high school on a Saturday morning. There was no other traffic and no pedestrians present. Despite this, the infraction resulted in a court summons and a significant financial penalty. Naomi's goal wasn't merely to dispute the fine. She aimed for its complete dismissal. In the second row, a white woman wearing a peach blazer spoke softly to the man beside her. He responded with a chuckle and a shake of his head. The clerk reclined in her chair, clicking her pen, anticipating Naomi's misstep. And Deshaun? He glanced at his hands, apprehensive, perhaps even a little irritated. "You sure you want to do this?" He had asked her that morning while they waited outside the courthouse. Naomi had answered without lifting her eyes from her notes. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." He remained silent after that. Now, seated beside her at the defendant's table, he fidgeted in his chair, seemingly wishing he could vanish. He was 17 as well, but Naomi made him feel even younger simply by being next to him. Naomi then addressed the matter of selective enforcement. The stop sign in question had been disregarded by numerous drivers that morning, including 2 local sheriff's deputies. Naomi possessed video footage captured by a neighbor, which was time-stamped and easily discernible. The footage displayed vehicles proceeding without interruption. There were no visible lights, no audible sirens, and no issued citations. She positioned a small USB drive on the table and raised her gaze toward the judge. With the court's permission, I'd like to submit this as evidence. Judge Talcott remained still for a moment. Then, deliberately, he turned his attention to the bailiff. Let's take a look. The screen activated. The courtroom's attention focused. The video consisted of straightforward street footage captured by a home security camera. Vehicle after vehicle passed the sign without pausing. Naomi allowed the recording to play for 20 seconds before stopping it and indicating a license plate belonging to a county sheriff. I'm not suggesting that the law shouldn't be enforced, she stated, only that it should be enforced fairly. There was no laughter this time. The judge, however, crossed his arms. And you believe this demonstrates your cousin was treated unfairly? Naomi replied concisely. It demonstrates that enforcement lacks consistency. And when enforcement lacks consistency, citations can become subjective. He observed her intently for a moment. Naomi remained composed under his gaze. What the majority of individuals present didn't realize, couldn't possibly know, was her dedication over the previous 2 summers, secretly attending hearings in 3 counties. She documented proceedings with a well-used pen, quietly reciting legal terminology into a tape recorder obtained from her science teacher. No one had instructed her in these actions. Her high school lacked law electives, and internship opportunities for girls like her were scarce in Berrien County. Consequently, she pursued self-study. She dedicated late nights to reading legal blogs and case opinions while her mom worked double shifts at the nursing home. She prioritized this over socializing, foregoing parties and school dances. It was her chosen path. Now, upon her first opportunity to apply her knowledge, those present perceived her as a young person pretending. I'll accept her. The judge cleared his throat. We'll admit the video for review. Continue. Naomi nodded and kept going, but the atmosphere hadn't changed yet. People still looked at her as if this would inevitably fail. But then Naomi said something that even made the court reporter lift her head. Naomi placed her palms flat on the table, leaned in just a little, and said, "This citation isn't just about a stop sign. It's about accountability. The question of whether authority figures, including officers, are held to the same standards as those they stop, that specific phrasing resonated powerfully. It didn't appear scripted, but its impact was undeniable. A noticeable silence fell over the room, unlike any that had come before. The murmuring ceased, and the expression softened. The clerk paused her pen-chewing habit. Even Judge Talcott reacted, seemingly surprised by her candid remark. Deshawn observed his cousin with a newfound perspective. He had always recognized her intelligence. Family members had expressed similar sentiments. However, this situation felt different. Naomi proceeded swiftly, turning to the subsequent page of her materials. Her notes were meticulously organized with a color-coded highlighting system. Blue indicated facts, green represented legal principles, and yellow marked quotes she had committed to memory. She began discussing Owens versus State of Georgia, a 1999 case concerning traffic enforcement and racial bias. She methodically reviewed the court's opinion, detailing it line by line, and clarified how the court recognized that unequal enforcement damaged public confidence. The judge intervened. "Ms. Ellison, are you drawing a comparison to the Owens case?" "That involved." She remained steady. "The relevant legal principles remain applicable, Your Honor. Selective enforcement compromises the fairness of any legal process, irrespective of whether it is criminal or civil." He reclined once more, his expression now neutral. The courtroom was fully engaged as well. The woman in the peach blazer now sat forward, resting her elbows on her knees, and intently listened. The man beside her put away his phone. Naomi proceeded. She presented traffic enforcement statistics from Willow Creek County, figures she had obtained via a Freedom of Information Act request and printed at the public library. The data revealed that 83% of traffic stops during the previous year involved black drivers, while census data indicated they comprised just under 40% of the population. She placed the documents before her. "I'm not suggesting anyone intentionally targeted my cousin," she stated. "The court is being asked to consider the established pattern. Ignoring patterns allows them to persist. This presentation is devoid of theatrics or raised voices. It is simply a recitation of facts and a quiet, direct assessment." Judge Talcott reviewed his notes, tapped his pen against the folder before him, then made a notation. The bailiff, Wiggins, folded his arms, not as an act of opposition, but in attentive listening. Deshawn murmured, "Yo, did you really obtain all those numbers?" Naomi murmured, her gaze fixed on the judge. "It took me 3 weeks." Deshawn blinked, surprised by the intensity of her statement. A cough echoed from a few rows behind. Yet no one chuckled. The judge remained silent, examining the printed documents before returning his attention to Naomi. "You've certainly done your homework, Miss Ellison," he observed. She offered a single nod, composed and prepared. Then, for the first time since she entered the courtroom, Naomi hesitated. The silence wasn't due to a lapse in her speech, but because she had arrived at the critical juncture of her argument. Her statement emphasized that the matter wasn't about achieving victory, it was about fairness. She affirmed that if the court found her cousin had indeed violated the law, they would abide by the decision. However, she insisted that if citations were to be issued in Cedar Creek County, they needed to carry consistent meaning regardless of the driver. This was the pivotal moment, not when she referenced legal precedent, nor when she presented the statistics. The sincerity of that statement seemed to resonate, and the judge closed his folder. "Let's take a 10-minute recess." Gasps weren't permitted in courtrooms, yet they were audible, noticeable in the subtle shifts of people and the murmured comment, "He never does that." During that brief pause, Naomi experienced her initial wave of genuine uncertainty. She sat on the unyielding wooden bench outside the courtroom, knees drawn close, hands tightly clasped around a bottle of water she hadn't opened. The braid at the nape of her neck was loosening, but she made no move to adjust it. She fixed her gaze straight ahead, seemingly observing something unseen by others. Deshawn sat next to her, his leg bouncing, his eyes darting frequently. "You good?" he eventually asked. She nodded, then murmured, "Yeah, but you don't seem it." A faint smile touched her lips. "I didn't come here to look good," he chuckled, then added more seriously, "Hey, thank you. For real. I didn't think you'd go that deep." She turned towards him. "You didn't think I meant it? I mean, I knew you were smart. I simply didn't realize you were this intelligent." Naomi did not respond. The courtroom door opened, and the bailiff motioned toward them. "Let's return to the matter at hand." Inside, the atmosphere had changed. The laughter from before had disappeared, yielding to a more subdued feeling. It wasn't quite respect. It wasn't quite admiration. It was simply focused attention. Judge Talcott observed Naomi when she re-entered. This time, he didn't squint or smirk. He continued to evaluate her. "Miss Ellison," he stated as she resumed her testimony, "let's hypothetically consider, just for a moment, that your assertion is valid. Could you please reference any specific wording in the law that would directly justify dismissing your cousin's citation?" Naomi responded promptly. "Yes, sir. Georgia Code, Section 40 to 620 details proper stop sign enforcement, but it also allows for interpretation regarding situations where enforcement might be applied unevenly or selectively. Moreover, the Equal Protection Clause, as defined in Yick W. v. Hopkins, dictates that selective enforcement predicated on arbitrary distinctions compromises the law's legitimacy." The courtroom fell silent once more. The judge inclined himself forward, resting his elbows on his desk, observing her as if searching for a weakness. "I notice you're quite well informed," he remarked. "Yes, Your Honor." He then stated, his voice a little more pointed, that if she intended to cite Yick W., she should also be ready to discuss its relevance beyond licensing matters. She affirmed, explaining that the ruling's core principle extended beyond licenses. It concerned fairness under the law. The ruling explicitly stated that even seemingly neutral laws could not be applied in a discriminatory manner. For the first time, Judge Talcott refrained from interrupting, allowing her to complete her statement. He then folded his hands and looked directly at her. "Miss Ellison," he said, speaking almost calmly now, "what exactly do you want from this court?" Naomi took a breath. "I want my cousin's citation dismissed, and I want the court to acknowledge that enforcement patterns in this county deserve closer scrutiny." She didn't yell. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The judge examined the documents before him, then surveyed the courtroom, and lastly turned his gaze to Naomi. Unexpectedly, he posed a question. "May I review your notes?" Naomi was taken aback. "I'm sorry," he repeated. "Your notes. It's evident you've invested significant effort. I'd appreciate the opportunity to examine them." The inquiry was unusual. Judges rarely made such requests. Naomi approached and presented the notes. Her hand briefly touched the bench, but she maintained her balance. The judge examined the pages, methodically, handwritten, color-coded, and arranged with the precision of a junior associate at a leading downtown Atlanta firm. "This is remarkable," he stated after a prolonged pause. The courtroom remained silent. He then added, "However, you must understand that argument isn't always sufficient in court. Sometimes, regardless of how just you are, the structure doesn't yield." Naomi did not avert her gaze. "Then perhaps the structure requires pressure." The judge raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, someone in the gallery stood. The woman who stood in the back row appeared to be in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back tightly and a black blouse buttoned to the neck. She seemed like someone who didn't speak unless it was important. "Your Honor," she called out, her voice steady but quiet. Judge Talcott turned slowly. "Ma'am, you need to sit down. This isn't open for public comment." But the woman did not flinch. "I am Judith Minter. As a retired attorney with 41 years of experience in civil litigation, I feel compelled to state, for the record, that this young lady presented one of the most well-structured arguments I've observed in a courtroom, even among federal proceedings." While gasps weren't permitted, an audible intake of breath was clearly heard from half the gallery. Judge Talcott visibly stiffened but remained silent, simply observing Naomi. A fleeting, unreadable expression crossed his face. Frustration? Perhaps. Or something else entirely. He announced another recess. Naomi hurried outside. Her chest felt constricted, and her hands trembled slightly this time. Not from fear, but from the weight of everything. The room, the atmosphere, the abrupt quiet that followed the woman's statement. Deshawn followed her and sat next to her once more. "You all right?" he inquired. She hesitated before responding. Her fingers moved restlessly in her lap. Why would she say that? Naomi asked, almost to herself. Why would someone like her defend me? Deshawn shrugged, because she observed what everyone else had seen. Naomi allowed her shoulders to relax a little. Her entire body had been rigid for more than an hour, and she hadn't been aware of it. The courtroom doors opened again, and Naomi was surprised when Judith Minter emerged and approached her. "Miss Ellison," she said softly as she sat down next to her on the bench. "Do you understand the sort of bravery it requires to stand where you just stood, particularly without the qualifications? That's not something that can be fabricated." Naomi began to speak, but Judith raised a hand. "I'm not attempting to compliment you," she said. "I'm stating a fact. And if you ever consider a career in law, I mean professionally, please contact me. I know individuals who would be fortunate to guide someone with your potential." Naomi paused, unsure how to respond. All she could say was, "Thank you." Judith smiled, then rose. "Finish well. Don't allow him to manipulate you. He possesses more intelligence than he conveys, but he's likely to show you deference if you remain perceptive." Following that, the woman vanished down the hallway, her heels clicking softly against the tile. Deshawn turned to Naomi, a combination of awe and disbelief evident on his face. "Yo, who are you right now?" She offered a quiet, almost weary laugh. "I'm just me." However, something in her demeanor had shifted. The anxiety was still present, but it no longer dominated. Not entirely. The bailiff entered the room. "They're ready." Naomi stood, adjusted her shirt, and retrieve her folder. As she re-entered the courtroom, there were no whispers, no smirks, and Judge Talcott no longer leaned back as if dismissing her. Instead, he leaned forward. Naomi returned to the table, arranged her closing statement, and awaited approval. The judge offered a brief nod. "Proceed." She took a final breath to compose herself, and then she began. The words she was about to speak would silence the entire courtroom. Naomi spoke calmly, no need for raised tones. "My cousin is a teenager. He committed a minor error. But if the law isn't applied equally to all, young, old, black, white, officer, civilian, then it ceases to be law. It transforms into a suggestion, or, even more detrimentally, punishment for some and a caution for others." A stillness fell over the room. No one moved. Every gaze in that room was focused on her. Even the clerk, who had kept her fingers poised over the keyboard, was frozen midair. She continued, "We've all heard that justice is blind, but it shouldn't be deaf. It shouldn't ignore patterns, or silence people who speak up about them." Naomi walked slowly to the evidence table, pulled up the citation, and held it out. This citation isn't just about a stop sign. It's about the choice to enforce, or not enforce, the law based on who's in the driver's seat. Her voice remained steady, almost calm, but her words carried significant weight. She addressed the judge. "You inquired previously about what I sought from this court. I stated then that I desired the citation dismissed, and I maintain that desire. However, I also want recognition that fairness should not be something earned through appearances or background. It should be inherent, a given, for all." Judge Talcott looked down, tapping the citation folder again with the corner of his pen. He remained silent. "Not yet. I may not hold a degree," Naomi stated, "but I've gained knowledge observing courtrooms and opinions and law books over the past 2 years. I've learned that when justice functions correctly, it isn't felt as dominance. It feels like understanding, like recognition that you were listened to." Her voice faltered just a little at that final word. Not enough to disrupt her flow, but enough to serve as a reminder to those present that she remained a teenager. Still human. Still someone who shouldn't have been required to prepare for this. She closed her folder and stepped back. Silence. A full 10 seconds elapsed before Judge Talcott finally exhaled. He adjusted his glasses, surveyed the courtroom, then focused his eyes on Naomi. "I've been doing this for a long time," he said. "Long enough to recognize when someone enters this courtroom with something prepared, and when they enter with something authentic." He paused. "You, Miss Ellison, you presented something authentic." Another pause. "I am dismissing the citation. The issue isn't related to your cousin's connections, but rather the manner in which you presented this case. Furthermore, the evidence you offered prompted questions that this court cannot disregard." A murmur arose within the gallery, marked by surprise, quietness, and deference, yet he had not concluded. Judge Talcott moved forward, placing his hands on the desk. "To be candid, I initially found amusement in your presentation, and that was an error. You didn't simply prepare, you informed this courtroom, and myself included. You maintained your position in a setting not intended for someone of your stature to speak with authority. And I believe this will not be the last instance." He tapped the gavel once. Not forcefully, simply to conclude proceedings. Court is adjourned. Naomi remained still initially. Deshawn observed her as if she were an unfamiliar person. Or perhaps he was at long last perceiving the version of her that had always existed. Those present in the gallery did not immediately leave. Several approached her discreetly. The clerk even nodded once, murmuring, "Nice work, kid." Naomi held her folder close to her chest again. But now it didn't seem like a shield. It felt like a credential. As she and Deshawn walked out into the sun, he nudged her. "You're going to be on somebody's billboard one day." She laughed. "Not unless they catch me on a good hair day." He smiled wide. "Nah, I mean it. You changed something in there." Naomi looked ahead at the street, eyes squinting against the light. "I hope so." What followed would demonstrate that this instance marked merely the commencement of events. A week later, Naomi found herself once again in her bedroom, amidst piles of notebooks, scattered pens, and her age school laptop adorned with discolored stickers. Her triumph at the courthouse had been reported in the local news. It wasn't extensive coverage, simply a few brief mentions in the Nashville Herald and a Facebook post from an individual who had been present in the gallery. However, the phone call that fundamentally altered the situation did not originate from a journalist. The call originated from the office of attorney Roland Brewster, located in Macon. She nearly ignored it, as the phone number was unknown and her mom had cautioned her against answering unrecognized calls. However, an intuition prompted her to answer. "Is this Naomi Ellison?" A voice inquired. "Yes," she replied. "This is Angela from the office of Roland Brewster. He would like to speak with you, if you're available." Naomi straightened on the bed. Certainly?" A click was heard. A man's voice then spoke, warm yet straightforward. "Naomi, my name is Roland. I've been practicing law in Georgia for 27 years. A colleague of mine, Judith Minter, sent me a copy of your court presentation. She said I'd be a fool not to reach out." Naomi remained silent initially, not due to nerves, as she wasn't feeling them. She was simply uncertain if it was genuine. "I want to offer you something," he continued. "It's not a job, yet, but it's a mentorship, one that could develop into something further. There's a summer program designed for young, creative thinkers. We want you to be a part of it." She discovered her ability to speak up. "But I haven't started college yet. I haven't even finished high school." He chuckled. "That's not important. We're not seeking degrees. We're looking for minds capable of sparking change." Naomi looked at her notes. The same ones she'd used in court, now spread across her desk like discarded awards. "I'm intrigued," she said. "Excellent," Brewster replied. "Please send me a copy of that argument." Following the call, Naomi remained still for an extended period. She didn't move or smile, simply taking everything in. A change had occurred. The courtroom proceedings were over. However, her personal journey, that unconventional path she had constructed independently, using library books and YouTube lectures, was no longer hidden. Her mom entered the room. "Are you hungry?" she inquired. Naomi nodded, feeling ravenous. Sitting opposite each other at the small kitchen table, her mom inquired, "Do you truly desire to pursue this law? Seriously?" Naomi ate her sandwich deliberately, then responded, "Yes. I believe I already am." Her mom offered a look, a drawn-out, probing expression unique to mothers, and then nodded once. Following this, she stated, "Then you better continue demonstrating your capabilities." That evening, Naomi remained up reading, driven not by obligation, but by a sense of purpose. Analyzing legal precedent felt less like an assignment and more like a language she was finally proficient in. The following morning, she received another call, this time from a high school student from 2 towns over. "Hey," the girl said, "I saw what you did. My brother's case is similar. I don't know where to begin. Could I ask you a question?" And with that, Naomi evolved into something more, not just a bright student, not just a relative advocating for family. She stood as an illustration, a demonstration that excellence doesn't await authorization, and fairness doesn't demand a position, but only truth, clarity, and the courage to speak. She didn't require a law degree to impact a courtroom. She simply needed an opportunity. And when she received it, she ensured no one would ever perceive her identically again. Your voice doesn't need a platform. It merely needs to be heard. If Naomi's story resonated with you, ensure you subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded. The key isn't the origin, but the level of dedication you demonstrate. During a flight, a black pastor was asked to remove his cross. Rather than reacting with anger, he rose and shared a message that captivated everyone. It was a pleasant Friday morning in late April when Pastor Elijah Rowe entered Raleigh-Durham International Airport through the sliding glass doors, pulling a small black carry-on behind him. He wasn't hurried, never was. At 58 years old, Elijah possessed the composed demeanor of someone who understood that serenity wasn't achieved through haste. His flight to Albuquerque was planned with a connection in Kansas City, and Flight 287 would transport him through the initial segment. He was wearing a light cream linen shirt, dark slacks, and worn brown shoes that had been present at numerous potluck dinners and hospital rooms beyond measure. However, what distinguished him wasn't his attire. It was the small wooden cross resting softly against his chest. It wasn't ostentatious or large. No gold, no diamonds, simply a piece of carved wood, the edges softened by years of use. His grandmother had given it to him when he was 18, shortly before her passing. "Wear it when the world forgets who you are," she told him. He hadn't taken off since. At gate C21, Elijah located a quiet corner seat and retrieved a notepad. He didn't prepare his sermons on a laptop. He favored paper, appreciating the sound of pen against page. This week's message concerned forgiveness, once more. He quietly chuckled to himself. "It feels as though I'm meant to continue sharing what I'm still discovering," he murmured, taking a sip of lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. The boarding call came promptly. He rose, offered a pleasant good morning to the gate agent, and proceeded down the jet bridge. He gave a brief acknowledgement to the flight attendant stationed by the door. A tall woman with a formal demeanor and a precise tone. "Seat 22, Elijah spoke quietly to himself as he walked down the aisle. A young man was already settled into 22B, wearing headphones and a hoodie. Elijah offered a polite smile and took a seat by the window. The boy didn't acknowledge him. That was acceptable. Elijah didn't require conversation to feel at ease. He positioned the cross against his shirt and continued writing in his notebook. After 15 minutes, the cabin door closed. The aircraft began to pull away from the gate. The standard announcements were made, followed by the familiar, somewhat jarring sound as the plane accelerated down the runway. Elijah murmured a brief prayer as the plane ascended into the sky. He was halfway through his outline on Luke 6 when a voice broke his concentration. "Sir," a woman's voice said from the aisle. "Sir, excuse me." Elijah looked up to see the same tall flight attendant from earlier, standing beside him. "Yes, ma'am?" he asked, his eyes gentle. She did not smile. "Could you please tuck your necklace into your shirt?" Elijah blinked. "My cross." She nodded. "We've received some complaints." He looked around, surprised. "From whom?" She replied quickly, "I can't disclose that. We simply request that passengers be considerate of items that may cause discomfort to others." He studied her face for a moment. There was no warmth in it, no opportunity for discussion. "I'm sorry," Elijah said slowly, "but this necklace isn't a display. It's my faith. It was my grandmother's." "Sir, I'm not attempting to argue with you," she said, her voice tightening. "I'm requesting that you please comply with a straightforward request so we can avoid any additional issues." "Is this an airline policy?" Her lips formed a thin line. "I need your cooperation," she stated. The young man in 22B adjusted his hoodie and looked at Elijah, then averted his gaze. Elijah kept his hands still on his notebook. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved. "I'm sorry," he repeated, his tone even quieter this time. "But I won't be hiding it." The flight attendant released a breath through her nose, appearing visibly annoyed. "I'll be back," she said, and then turned and left. Elijah leaned back in his seat and looked out the window. Below them, the clouds spread out, a vast expanse of brilliant white. He touched the cross carefully, his thumb tracing the worn rim. This feeling wasn't unfamiliar, not precisely. Yet it felt altered, as if something had changed, though he couldn't yet identify what. The flight continued, and so did their discussion. The drink cart was 2 rows behind when she returned, without a smile, without warmth. She maintained the same rigid posture and that precise, formal tone, making each word feel like a protocol rather than an exchange. "Sir," she repeated, standing before Elijah's row, her arms now crossed. "I must ask you once more to secure the necklace." A woman 2 rows above expressed that she finds it objectionable. Elijah didn't reply immediately. He observed her intently. Her name tag indicated C. Densmore. Her uniform was immaculate, with not a single thread amiss. She repeatedly looked at the other passengers, seemingly searching for support or an observer. He focused his gaze forward. In row 20, a woman wearing a blue blazer and large sunglasses remained fixedly ahead. She didn't look back, didn't move restlessly, simply waited. "I understand what you're saying," Elijah responded steadily. "But I am innocent. I haven't spoken to anyone. I'm simply sitting here quietly. Why is this necklace causing a problem?" Claire Densmore's jaw tightened. "This isn't concerning your silence. It's important to be thoughtful. If someone finds something you're wearing upsetting, it's fair to ask you to modify it, Elijah stated calmly. If someone is offended by my faith, I don't believe that gives them the right to suppress it. At that point, her tone changed. A hint of her composure faded. You are being uncooperative, she said, her voice rising. I am asking you respectfully, but you are being confrontational, and several heads turned. A woman situated 2 rows back extended into the aisle, observing. A man seated across from Elijah shifted his position to gain a clearer view. Elijah's pulse quickened, though his expression remained unchanged. He glanced toward the young man in 22B. The kid had retrieved his phone, subtly, not overtly. Screen angled upwards, thumb poised above the record button. I'm not trying to provoke anyone, Elijah said, speaking deliberately. But I won't conceal my cross. I won't take it away to accommodate another person's ease. I apologize. Claire expressed her disapproval. Then we may have to escalate this, she stated firmly. You're refusing to follow a directive from a flight crew member. That's a federal offense, someone exclaimed. Are you serious? Another voice inquired from a few rows back. A middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard leaned into the aisle. He's literally just sitting there, he observed. Claire disregarded him. I'm going to inform the captain, she declared, maintaining eye contact with Elijah. We'll handle this when we land. Of course, Elijah responded. She turned and walked away again, this time with a quicker pace, speaking quietly to another flight attendant as she moved past the drink cart. The ensuing silence felt heavy. Elijah remained still in his seat, his pen still held between his fingers. The pages of his sermon notes shifted gently in the airflow from the overhead vent. Then a quiet voice emerged. Sir, the boy beside him whispered, almost lost in the plane's hum. I'm recording, just so you know, in case they attempt anything. Elijah slowly turned his head and offered the boy a thankful nod. Thank you, he said softly. I saw everything, the boy added. She's way out of line, Elijah smiled slightly. Sometimes it's not about the cross, it's about the person wearing it. The boy remained silent, but glanced down at his phone, which was still recording. 3 rows back, an older black woman whispered something to the person beside her. Her gaze met Elijah's for a brief moment. She offered him a subtle nod, as if acknowledging his presence and understanding his situation. That gesture carried weight. The intercom buzzed, and another attendant, not Claire, delivered a brief announcement regarding anticipated light turbulence. Standard procedure. However, the atmosphere on the plane had changed noticeably. Passengers were no longer solely focused on sleeping or entertainment. They were alert and observant. It wasn't the sort of attention Elijah desired, but his perspective had become secondary. Before the plane could land, an unexpected event occurred, one that even Elijah hadn't anticipated. By the time the plane stabilized after the turbulence warning, Claire Dinsmore returned to the aisle, but she was accompanied by another flight attendant. He was a younger man with dark hair and visibly nervous eyes. His name tag identified him as Jonas Worth, and unlike Claire, he lacked confidence in his demeanor. His steps were hesitant, appearing almost apologetic. Mr. Rowe, Claire began, ensuring her voice carried to a significant portion of the cabin. I've spoken with the captain. If you persist in disregarding crew instructions, we might need to take additional measures upon arrival. Elijah remained unperturbed. I would still appreciate knowing which policy I'm in violation of. You're becoming argumentative once more, Claire retorted. Jonas moved closer, observing the interaction. Perhaps we could simply... Claire interrupted him. Jonas, I'm managing this. And then it reappeared, that palpable tension, that familiar tone. Elijah stayed seated, outwardly calm, though his heart raced. Behind them, row 19 began to move. I don't see why he should be made to conceal his cross, a woman with curly red hair and a noticeable Wisconsin accent stated. I wear a Star of David necklace on every flight. I've never been addressed about it. Claire turned quickly. Ma'am, I am requesting you refrain from intervening. The woman responded, I'm not interfering. I'm simply observing that this feels like he's being unfairly targeted. At that moment, something changed noticeably. The atmosphere shifted. Passengers were no longer simply observing, but responding. A gentleman in seat 18D, craned his neck. Is this truly how this airline handles situations? He inquired. I'm recording as well, and I understand how swiftly videos spread online. Claire appeared taken aback. She started to speak, then hesitated and closed her mouth. Elijah, Jonas said quietly, intervening and lowering his tone. Sir, I apologize truly. You've been entirely respectful. I believe we should reduce the tension. Let's allow this to pass. Claire's cheeks reddened. She looked at Jonas as if he had committed a betrayal. Then, with a visible effort to control herself, she hissed. He's disregarding a direct order. To do what? Elijah asked, maintaining his composure. To conceal a portion of myself that I've carried for 40 years? That doesn't seem correct to me, ma'am. Claire's jaw tightened again. I am finished. She turned and walked forcefully toward the front of the plane, her shoulders stiff with anger. Jonas remained behind, feeling unsure. I apologize for all of this, he said softly to Elijah. I believe she misinterpreted the circumstances, she responded. I think she understood perfectly, Elijah said calmly. She simply didn't approve of what she observed. Jonas lowered his gaze, then looked away. The cabin stabilized, but a feeling of unease lingered. Passengers murmured along the aisle, with some visibly shaking their heads. A cough broke the silence. The boy in 22B continued filming. Then Elijah took an unexpected action. He rose to his feet. Without raising his voice or gesturing, he stood in the confined area near his seat and angled himself so those in the surrounding rows could hear. I don't often speak in public spaces such as this, he began, his voice steady but quiet. But I believe it's important to say something. One by one, people turned to look at him. I'm a pastor, he continued. I serve a small church in Durham. This cross, he raised it carefully between his fingers, was a gift from my grandmother. She experienced events that many of us only read about. She advised me to wear this when the world attempted to define me. A brief silence followed. I have not removed it since her funeral. My reason isn't that I believe it improves me, but that it serves as a reminder to remain compassionate. Even when I am not shown kindness, a person in 24C covered their mouth. Another individual in 20F audibly sniffled. I understand not everyone shares my beliefs. I acknowledge and respect that, but I am certain I have acted appropriately. I remained still, adhered to every guideline, and attempted to be courteous, even when I felt diminished. He addressed Jonas directly. I do not require being asked to leave this flight. I pose no danger. I am merely a man traveling home to deliver a sermon on forgiveness on Sunday. The atmosphere on the plane was subdued, yet sometimes silence conveys more than words ever could, and the quietness wasn't going to last much longer. Claire had not reappeared since she departed. The whereabouts of Eleanor remained uncertain, whether she was in the galley, visibly upset, or once again speaking with the captain. It was unclear. However, the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. It wasn't just one person standing. Instead, a sense of reality had permeated the space, manifesting in every hushed exchange and fleeting look shared among those seated within 30 rows. Elijah quietly resumed his seat, as if finishing a chapter in a novel. He sought no accolades and craved no validation. He simply released a breath. The young man next to him ceased recording, though he kept his phone in hand. You sure you're pastor? He inquired softly, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Elijah laughed. Some Sundays I question it myself, he admitted. The young man chuckled and glanced at his phone screen. That's already being shared. People need to hear things like that. A few minutes elapsed. Following that, the woman in the blue blazer, the one Claire had mentioned complained about, gradually turned from 2 rows forward. Her sunglasses were now removed. She appeared to be in her mid-50s, with a tense expression, yet there was a gentleness about her. I remained silent. She spoke in a matter-of-fact tone. Elijah lifted his eyebrows. Mom, I never said I was upset. I didn't mention your necklace. The atmosphere became quiet once more. Several passengers who had been listening seemed interested. She simply inquired if I was all right, the woman added, and I replied that I hadn't observed anything. Are you suggesting Claire wasn't truthful? Someone murmured behind Elijah. The woman in the blazer remained silent. She pivoted, appearing somewhat less confident. Jonas emerged from the front of the plane. His shirt now had a slight wrinkle, as if he's been twisting his hands. He stopped near Elijah's row and bent down a little, speaking quietly. "The captain is aware," he said. "And just so you know, you're not in any trouble. We're not removing you. There's no written reprimand. Nothing." Elijah nodded. "Thank you for letting me know." Jonas expressed regret that things hadn't unfolded differently, noting that occasionally individuals carry emotional burdens that extend beyond physical luggage. Elijah offered a subtle smile in agreement, commenting that this phenomenon is evident in various settings, not just airplanes. Jonas paused, then continued, "I'm not sure if this is inappropriate, but would you be comfortable with me attending your church sometime? I used to go when I was younger, but it's been a long time." Elijah's smile widened. "Certainly. Please do. I'll be sure to reserve a place for you." Jonas gently touched the armrest before departing. As he moved back up the aisle, a woman seated opposite Elijah bent forward. "Pastor," she murmured, "thank you." He observed her. She appeared older, possibly in her 70s. A long green scarf adorned her, and her hands rested in her lap, as if guarding something delicate. "You didn't need to speak," she said, "but you did." "Sometimes silence can feel heavier than a voice," Elijah replied. She smiled, her eyes glistening. "That is precisely it." The boy beside Elijah nudged him gently. Elijah gazed out the window. "Let's just hope I'm preaching the same on Sunday as I'm living right now," he thought. A woman with curly hair, whom he's seen before, spoke from behind. "I think the Lord already gave you your sermon, Pastor," she said. "You just preached it at 35,000 feet. Laughter rippled through the cabin, soft, sincere, and welcome. Conversations started again, moving beyond quiet murmurs. A sense of energy and relief filled the cabin, as if it had expelled something it had been containing. However, Claire was still missing. But when she ultimately returned, she would not be alone, and she would not anticipate what awaited her. Approximately 40 minutes had passed since Claire's disappearance. It was believed she would remain missing until the landing. Yet, just as the seatbelt sign illuminated once more, she reappeared, accompanied by the captain himself. Captain Raymond Stills was in his mid-40s, gray hair buzzed close, weathered skin from years in cockpits. He didn't appear angry. He didn't appear rushed. But there was something in his face, an alert stillness, like someone who had seen far worse and didn't want to make a situation worse than it already was. He stopped beside Elijah's row and crouched slightly, just as Jonas had. "Sir," he said in a low, calm voice, "my name's Ray. I understand there's been some tension on board." Elijah met his gaze directly. "Captain," I remained silent. "This cross I'm wearing appeared to cause concern for a flight attendant. She requested that I conceal it. I declined." Ray observed the necklace, then noted Elijah's composed demeanor. "I appreciate your manner," the captain said. "It's more significant than you realize these days." Claire stood rigidly behind him, her arms crossed. Those seated around appeared to be ignoring the situation, yet no one was wearing headphones. All were attentively listening. "I've spoken with my crew," Ray said, "and I've reviewed the footage. Several passengers had documented portions of the interaction, including the young man seated nearby." Elijah briefly looked at the teenager, who offered a subtle nod, still clutching his phone as if it were a barrier. Ray rose and surveyed the adjacent rows. "I want to be clear," he stated, his voice now more pronounced. "This airline has no rule against religious symbols, be it a cross, a hijab, a yarmulke, or another item. Passengers may express their beliefs provided they do so respectfully. Based on observations, Pastor Rowe has been acting in that manner, prompting nods and applause from several people." Quiet, polite, and without drama, Ray addressed Claire. "We're going to have a more in-depth conversation after we land." Claire offered no reply. Her expression remained unreadable, but her jaw was tense. She turned and walked back toward the galley without another word. Ray leaned toward Elijah. "You're not in trouble. You never were. I apologize on behalf of the crew." "You don't have to," Elijah replied, "but I appreciate it." Ray offered a small smile. "Well, some things are still worth saying. And with that, he returned to the cockpit. Jonas reappeared moments later and quietly offered Elijah a free drink and snack box. "Captain's orders," he said sheepishly. "You deserve at least that," Elijah chuckled. "I'll take the almonds." As the plane began its descent into Kansas City, a different feeling settled over the cabin. People were chatting again, not nervously but openly. Two men who hadn't spoken the whole flight were now exchanging church stories. A young woman pulled out her Bible and started highlighting verses. A toddler across the aisle waved at Elijah, and his mother mouthed, "Thank you." Elijah simply sat back and completed his sermon notes. He wrote, "Forgiveness, but not silence." The older woman in green across the aisle retrieved a pen and wrote something on a napkin, then passed it to Elijah. He unfolded it and read, "You reminded us how to carry grace." "Thank you." He folded the napkin and placed it into his notebook. The plane began its final descent, but there was a quiet sense of closure. It felt as though something had broken and then repaired itself, if only a little. Unbeknownst to Elijah, the event wasn't concluded. The world beyond that plane had already taken notice. Flight 287 landed in Kansas City just after 4:20 p.m. The tires made a soft thumping sound as they touched the runway. The standard chime occurred. Passengers unfastened their seatbelts. The overhead compartments released with a click. Yet, a peculiar stillness permeated the movement, as if no one wished to be the first to disrupt the significance of what had transpired in the air. As the plane taxied toward the gate, a flight attendant, someone other than Claire, announced over the intercom. Her voice sounded nervous, almost shaky. She expressed gratitude for everyone flying with them that day. For those continuing their journey to Albuquerque, boarding would resume shortly after a brief pause. Elijah waited patiently. He consistently prioritized allowing others to disembark first. He remained seated with his hands resting on his notebook, his cross still noticeable as the aisle emptied. When he eventually stood to collect his bag, Jonas greeted him at the plane's front. "Sir," he stated, "there are two airport officers just outside the jet bridge. They're not here for you. They simply want to speak briefly with the crew and take a statement." Elijah raised an eyebrow. Was someone pressing charges? "No," they replied, but once the footage started spreading, someone tagged airport security, then a few others. "I suppose people are watching." Elijah stepped off the plane and into the fluorescent-lit walkway. Two officers stood to the side, but neither approached him. They spoke softly with a woman holding a clipboard, presumably a gate supervisor. Jonas acknowledged him with a nod and returned to the aircraft. Inside the terminal, Elijah located a quiet seat near the window. He retrieved his phone for the first time in hours, revealing 30 new messages, missed calls, and a voicemail from his assistant at the church. However, a notification at the top of the screen caught his attention. A video had gone viral. It was the recording from the teen in seat 22B, now shared on TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. The caption stated, "Flight attendant attempts to embarrass pastor for wearing a cross." See his response. It had over 800,000 views and was increasing. Elijah watched only a few seconds. The video showed him seated calmly, Claire standing over him. Her voice was sharp, his reply quiet and steady. Then it shifted to his impromptu speech, the cross visible between his fingers. He turned the phone face down. He disliked attention, always had. He wasn't a person seeking headlines or clicks. A deeper feeling resonated within him. It wasn't pride, nor was it fear. It was the weight of being observed. A few minutes passed, and the teenager from 22B approached him. "Hey," the boy said, slightly winded. "I'm getting off here. My layover's in KC. I just wanted to say thanks again for not reacting negatively." Elijah smiled. "You accomplished more than I did." "You spoke the truth," the kid laughed. "No, man, you experienced it. I simply captured it on video." He extended his hand. "I'm Tyrell, by the way." "Elijah," they responded, shaking hands. The boy departed, his phone still in his hand, now with a more upright posture. Elijah reclined and rubbed his eyes. The day's burden began to weigh heavily on him. Immediately, his phone vibrated, displaying a message from his assistant. The church board viewed the video. They requested he address the matter on Sunday. Discussions about it were widespread. He rested his head against the terminal window. Outside, a plane was ascending. The engines created a powerful roar. The sun had descended just enough to illuminate the wings in gold. This was not what he had envisioned. He had come seeking tranquility and found himself amidst turmoil. Yet, perhaps storms were not always intended to be averted. For sometimes, the most profound teachings begin well before the formal setting and resonate far beyond the conclusion of a journey. Sunday morning arrived sooner than Elijah anticipated. He stood behind the pulpit at Grace Fellowship in Durham, the same location where he delivered sermons almost every week for the preceding 18 years. However, this time, the atmosphere felt altered. The seating was more densely filled. Unfamiliar faces occupied the pews, some from different churches, and others seemingly from nowhere. Phones were already capturing video before he began speaking. He chose not to start with scripture this time. He advanced, set his notes to the side, and surveyed the audience. Most of you viewed the video. He started. Some of you shared it, while others placed calls. Some expressed anger. Some inquired why I didn't shout, why I didn't call her out, why I didn't fight back. He paused, allowing the atmosphere to become still. I've considered that as well. I've been reflecting on it consistently since. There were no microphone issues, no sounds of discomfort, just a quiet stillness. I remained composed on that plane, not from a place of fragility or fear, but because I've experienced enough to understand that the most prominent voice isn't always the most powerful. Occasionally, fortitude lies in remaining still when every instinct urges action. Occasionally, it's about declining with composure rather than anger, heads affirmed throughout the sanctuary. I didn't display that cross to instigate anyone. I wore it because it serves as a reminder of my identity. And when someone asks you to conceal the very essence that formed you, you are presented with two options: suppress your being to ease others, or remain steadfast and allow the resulting unease to reside with another. He glanced across the first row. Terrell was present beside Elijah's assistant. He offered a slight smile. The incident on that flight affected everyone. It highlighted how frequently we are instructed to be less assertive, quieter, and more accommodating. However, the reality is that one's beliefs, personal narrative, and cultural background are not liabilities. They are not something to be regretted, nor are they expendable. He touched the small wooden cross he wore and lifted it with care. My grandmother gifted me this not for its appearance, but for its enduring significance. She told me, "They'll try to take your voice. Don't hand them your silence, too." A low murmur ran through the crowd. Grief, pride, recognition. He took a deep breath. I don't hate the woman from a plane. I'm not angry, but I hope she saw something that day that challenged her. And I hope we all remember, just because the world can't carry your truth doesn't mean you need to hide it. He stepped back. The congregation stood without prompting. It wasn't applause. It wasn't noise. A palpable sense of unity arose, as if a profound understanding transcended mere words. Following the service, Elijah emerged into the fresh spring air. Individuals approached him, extending handshakes, embraces, and cards. Some were visibly moved to tears. One woman gently placed her hand on his shoulder and quietly said, "You gave me permission to stop hiding." By that evening, the video had garnered 3.2 million views. Media organizations began contacting him, requesting interviews and soliciting editorials. But Elijah remained focused on his local community. His inbox remained full, yet his hand continued its work, visiting a family in the hospital, organizing food for the shelter, and completing the next week's sermon. The cross never left his neck. And for each story that arrived concerning someone standing up, speaking out, or simply choosing not to shrink, he'd whisper a quiet prayer. Not for praise, but for courage. The kind that doesn't roar, just the kind that remains. Because real change doesn't always begin with a protest or a headline. It begins with one person choosing to remain present. And if this story resonated with you, please don't simply move on, but share it, discuss it. And always remember to remain true to yourself, even when it's simpler to conform. Two men believed it was amusing to embarrass a mother in front of her children, until a mechanic, wearing a grease-stained shirt, quietly stopped them in front of everyone in the store. Roderick Blaine, 42, hadn't intended to be a hero that evening. He had just completed a long shift at the mechanic shop off Greenwell Springs Road in Baton Rouge. His work shirt still had a faint odor of oil and sweat, and his back felt sore in that familiar, persistent way it did when the weather suggested rain. He intended to quickly purchase a few items: milk, eggs, perhaps some smoked sausage, and return home before his niece completed her homework. She had been staying with him for several weeks while her mom worked the late shift at the hospital. They had established a regular pattern: dinner, cartoons, spelling drills. He didn't even use a cart, opting for a handheld basket and a mental list. The store experienced a lack of congestion, yet a palpable sense of unease hung in the air. Shoppers with weary expressions, children complaining, a hurried individual quickly maneuvering past, someone proceeding at a leisurely pace. It was the sort of atmosphere where direct glances were avoided, and all desired a swift entry and exit. Roderick was in the process of his internal review and moving towards the frozen foods area. That's when he detected it, a voice distinct, piercing, rising above the subdued sounds of checkout scanners and squeaking cartwheels. A different voice then, laced with laughter. It wasn't a pleasant sound, the type that prompted a tightening of the jaw before understanding its cause. He turned, his attention drawn to the disturbance. Two men were positioned close to the freezer doors. They appeared to be about his age, perhaps slightly younger. Both wore baseball caps. One had a Bluetooth earpiece, and the other displayed a tattoo extending up his neck. Their posture seemed relaxed, but their voices did not match. They weren't shouting, but they were acting. A young woman, likely in her early 30s, stood nearby. She was wearing a faded hoodie and attempting to manage two children, a toddler in the cart and a boy around 7 years old holding on. Her daughter was upset. Her son looked down at the floor. The woman held her SNAP card tightly. Roderick initially struggled to understand every word the men spoke, but their tone conveyed their message. They said she should have waited for a man before having so many children. He thought she likely had a different partner for each child. The man with the earpiece quietly laughed, shaking his head as if the woman were a joke. Roderick halted. He stood there, 2 feet from the frozen peas, one hand still holding his basket. He observed the woman's shoulders become rigid, her jaw tighten. However, she didn't acknowledge them. She focused on her daughter, gently moving the cart back and forth as if it were a cradle. Silence filled the space. No one intervened. He looked around the aisle. The sound registered. A teenage cashier briefly looked up. An older woman close to the produce section stood motionless, feigning interest in a label. The moment lingered, as if everyone hoped it would simply disappear. It did not. Roderick advanced. He didn't move towards the woman, nor towards the man. Just forward. His heart began its familiar, heavy rhythm, the one that accompanies the confusion of anger and shame. He recognized this feeling. It wasn't precisely the moment, but it felt similar. Different people, a different location. Still, the core message remained. He observed as the young man gently pulled at his father's coat. "Father, may we simply leave?" He crouched down, murmured something into his ear. His voice was quiet, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached into his wallet. Silas paused. He wasn't one for conflict. Not since 1998. But something about that young man's tone. Something about the way he inquired, "Can we just go?" As if the disgrace was theirs, not the adult men. It evoked a feeling within. And suddenly, Roderick forgot about the milk and eggs. However, before he could speak, the man with the earpiece added something. A statement that halted Roderick again, this time for a completely different cause. The man with the earpiece remarked, audible to several shoppers in the aisle, that if she allocated less time to accessing food stamps and more to employment, perhaps she wouldn't require assistance. The delivery of his statement was significant. He spoke loudly, seemingly intending for the entire store to overhear. The impression was that he aimed to publicly shame her. Roderick's hand tightened around the basket, his knuckles turning pale. He remained positioned back, partially obscured by the end cap displaying canned soups. From his vantage point, he observed the woman's profile. Her cheekbones were prominent, her mouth set in a firm line. She refused to offer them the gratification of a reaction, yet her tension was palpable. Her son held her waist tightly, as if securing her position. The other man, identified by the neck tattoo, bumped his companion and scoffed, "Don't waste your breath. She's probably just going to sell that food to buy a new wig." Roderick blinked. He paused, thinking he might have misunderstood. But no, that was what he had said. Still, no one reacted. The teenage cashier averted her gaze. The woman examining the fruit labels now intently checked her phone. A young man pushing a cart filled with Gatorade steered clear of them, as if avoiding something he couldn't see. It felt as though everyone was attempting to vanish. The mother tried to remain composed. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she succumb to despair. She deliberately gave her card to the cashier, her gaze fixed on the small display as if her well-being hinged on it. The toddler had become still, aware of the strained atmosphere. Roderick released a deep breath through his nose. He was observing a woman being openly humiliated for needing assistance. A woman who, judging by her appearance, seemed to be simply attempting to manage the day with her children fed and her self-respect preserved. Two adult men, appearing as though they'd avoided regular employment for some time, seemed intent on shaming her. The situation felt disturbingly recognizable. He recalled a childhood memory of standing in line with his mother around the age of 8 or 9 at a grocery store off Plank Road. He remembered the burning embarrassment of the stairs back then, the way people looked when his mom presented food stamps. She never discussed it openly. She simply told him, "Keep your head up and hold the bag, baby." The memory triggered something within him. He moved nearer, now fully visible. "Hey," he called out, the word carrying enough volume to draw the attention of both men. The individual with the earpiece lifted an eyebrow. The other offered a smirk. Roderick maintained a composed tone. "Evenly. You consistently address women in that manner, or is it only when you presume no one will object?" The men paused, appearing uncertain whether he intended it as a jest. The man bearing the tattoo chuckled faintly. "What? Your boyfriend? Or something?" Roderick shook his head. "Nah, I'm just a man who understands the difference between a joke and bullying." That seemed to surprise them. The man with the earpiece struggled to speak. Roderick moved forward. He didn't act aggressively or threaten anyone, but he positioned himself close enough to no longer be a background voice. Close enough that people in the aisle were now paying attention. "You notice a woman with her kids. She isn't causing any trouble. She was simply attempting to purchase groceries. And you decided today was the opportune moment to display how insignificant you are?" The neck tattoo guy rolled his eyes. "Man, mind your own business." Roderick didn't blink. "This is my business. Anytime I see a grown man harass a mother in front of her children as if it were entertainment, yeah, that's my business." A silence descended. Not the kind that signifies resolution. The kind that suggests a change has occurred. The woman remained standing at the register. Her hands paused, as if uncertain whether to continue packing her bag or observe the situation. Her son looked up at Roderick, his eyes wide with confusion. Before either man could react, the manager arrived, and his initial words would drastically alter the room's atmosphere. The store manager's voice pierced the tension, crisp and concise, though somewhat delayed. "Is there a problem over here?" he inquired. He was a short man in his 50s. Heavy-framed glasses, a khaki shirt tucked into worn jeans. A name tag identified him as Vince Callahan, and his darting eyes revealed he's been observing from afar, intervening only as the volume increased. Roderick remained silent initially, wanting to ascertain the recipient of the question. The two men straightened slightly, seemingly realizing they may have overstepped. "It's nothing," the person with the tattoo stated, raising their hands in a gesture of innocence. "We were simply having a conversation," the other person added hastily. "No one made contact with her or anything." Roderick looked toward Vince, who returned his gaze, seemingly unsure of his position in the situation. "Talking?" Roderick inquired, his voice calm. "Is that what you consider talking?" Vince paused. Look, I just want to avoid any problems in the store. Customers are trying to make purchases. Roderick inhaled deeply. Were you prepared to allow these two men to harass a woman in front of her children rather than address the issue? Vince reacted visibly to the statement. A silence fell, and everyone remained still. The mother continued to stand quietly, her hands now carefully arranging items into a single reusable grocery bag. She showed no tears. However, her expression held a detached quality, a type of emotional barrier people develop when they've learned to mask pain for an extended period. Roderick looked at her, then back at Vince. This isn't about comfort, man. It's about right and wrong. The words weren't loud, but they carried. A woman a few feet away who had been picking out yogurt suddenly nodded and muttered, "He's right." Then someone else, an older man in a camouflage jacket, murmured, "Ain't no need to talk to a lady like that. Especially not with her babies standing there." The tide was turning. The two men sensed it. The guy with the earpiece shifted uncomfortably. He stated, his voice quieter, "We didn't intend any harm. Just some playful interaction." Roderick turned, shaking his head gently. If causing distress to someone attempting to nourish her children is your idea of fun, a serious self-assessment is necessary. He spoke with clarity, avoiding raised voices or dramatic displays, simply stating facts. The tattooed man muttered something almost inaudible and began to leave. His companion followed suit. Vince made no attempt to detain them. Roderick did not pursue them either. His purpose wasn't to engage in a confrontation. It was to be witnessed asserting himself. Someone had done it, so that woman, her kids, and anyone else in the store would know. Vince remained behind, hands on his hips. "I'll speak with them if they return," he offered, his voice lacking conviction. Roderick didn't respond to him. He turned to the woman instead. "Are you all right?" She looked at him for the first time. Her voice was soft but clear. "Yes, thank you." The little boy peered out from behind his mother's hoodie, his eyes moving between her and Roderick. He remained silent, but he no longer seemed frightened. Roderick offered the kid a small smile. "You assisted your mother today. You performed well." The boy's lips moved slightly, as though he desired to return the smile, but hesitated. The mother then spoke. "People generally remain silent. They simply observe," Roderick confirmed. "Yes, I understand. I have been one of those individuals," he stated, meaning his words sincerely. He had remained quiet in different locations, different circumstances, not out of concurrence, but because it was simpler, unlike this time. Just as things seemed to be calming, the boy spoke, causing Roderick to hesitate more than any comment from the adults. Roderick was preparing to take his basket and allow them to proceed without interruption when the boy looked up and quietly asked, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" The unexpectedness and innocence of the question stopped Roderick in his tracks. The woman immediately turned, her eyes widening. "Baby, please don't say that." Roderick chuckled softly, not in derision, but in genuine surprise. He knelt down to be at the boy's eye level. "No, I'm not your bodyguard," he said, "but I noticed something that seemed amiss. And sometimes, when something is wrong, it's important to speak up." The boy appeared puzzled. "Even if it's not your mother," Roderick paused. "Particularly if it's not your mother." The mother retrieved her bag and reached for her son's hand. "Say thank you," she murmured, her voice remaining calm, but detached. "Thank you," the boy replied. His voice was softer now. Roderick rose, observing their preparations to depart. The toddler had fallen asleep against his sister's shoulder within the cart. The mother offered him a courteous nod, then refocused on her children and proceeded towards the door. Roderick remained standing for a moment longer, his basket dangling limply in his hand. His anger had subsided. He felt weary. Weary of encountering individuals who believed they could utter whatever they pleased to whomever, without repercussions. He was weary of seeing children learn those lessons without realizing it. He also felt frustrated by missed opportunities, moments that required the courage to speak up. He walked down the bread aisle, but suddenly everything felt wrong. He no longer felt like shopping. His appetite had disappeared near the frozen pizza. He drifted towards the self-checkout, considering he might just grab a drink, something cold, and leave. As he turned the corner, he saw them once more, the mother and her children positioned by the vending machines close to the exit. She was searching her purse, likely looking for coins. Her son was sitting on the bench, softly rocking his sleeping sister. Roderick lessened his pace. A portion of him desired to continue walking. He believed he had already fulfilled his responsibility. However, something about her expression. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was weariness. The kind of weariness that doesn't dissipate with rest. The weariness that accumulates over years of being overlooked, criticized, and disregarded. He moved closer, deliberately. Got enough for the machine? He inquired. She looked up, visibly surprised. Oh, I was just checking if I'd change. She explained, adding, I told him he could choose a snack if he waited patiently. Roderick reached into his pocket and produced a few wrinkled dollar bills. Let me assist, he offered. She paused. I didn't request, she began, but he gently interrupted. You didn't. I'm offering, she finished. Her expression subtly hardened. It was pride. It mirrored the clothing his mother used to wear. It was the sort of person who prefers self-reliance, yet recognizes respectful assistance when it's provided. She nodded once, her movement now with less uncertainty. Her son selected a pack of cookies and a juice. Roderick inserted the payment and observed the machine's mechanical sounds as it dispensed the item, resembling a somewhat awkward expression of gratitude. What's your name? She asked. Roderick extended his hand. Tanya. Tanya Wells. A tremor passed between them. A connection felt beyond a simple meeting. Her gaze settled on him, clear and unwavering, devoid of gratitude or obligation. Just even. No response was needed back there, she observed. I know, Roderick replied. But I didn't want your son to perceive that silence as typical, she confessed, pausing briefly before directing her attention to her boy, who was eagerly opening a package of cookies, as if it were Christmas. I hope he remembers your face, she said, and Roderick remained silent. He was at a loss for words. However, before he could leave, Tanya posed a question he hadn't anticipated, causing him to observe her and himself with a new perspective. You got kids? Tanya inquired. Roderick was taken aback by the question. It was delivered so casually, as if requesting directions. Yet, the underlying significance felt more substantial than the words suggested. He paused, then offered a slight shrug. No, not mine anyway. My niece has been staying with me. Her mom works nights at the hospital. Tanya nodded, indicating she understood. So you're the safe place for somebody? Roderick hesitated. He hadn't previously considered that perspective. He wasn't intentionally trying to be a safe place for anyone. He was simply providing assistance, doing what was necessary. However, the way she phrased it caused a feeling of constriction in his chest. Trying to be, he replied. They paused briefly in that unusual area situated between two vending machines and an automatic door, which repeatedly opened and closed as customers passed. The exterior air grew darker. The store's illumination made the location feel colder than it actually was. Tanya carefully removed her daughter from the cart, cradling her in one arm. The toddler shifted, appearing drowsy but making no noise. You don't speak as if you're frightened, she stated. I wasn't, Roderick responded. He didn't express a desire for a confrontation, she observed, receiving a slight smile in response. I've experienced conflict before, he stated. It hasn't altered much. Words did today. Roderick remained silent initially, because, honestly, he wasn't certain what the day had altered, if anything at all. The men departed as if everything were normal. Vince, the manager, offered little resistance. The majority of onlookers simply remained still and watched. However, her son had smiled, and Tanya was still present, standing tall. That surely had to signify something. At that moment, the automatic door opened once more, and the two men from before re-entered. Roderick's body stiffened immediately. Tanya's did too. She held her daughter closer. Her son slid off the bench and moved behind her, as if trying to disappear. However, the men didn't glance in their direction. They kept their gaze ahead, bypassed Roderick entirely, and proceeded toward the rear of the store. Perhaps they would return for beer. Or perhaps they had simply forgotten something. They remained silent. They avoided eye contact, They didn't even acknowledge our presence. Roderick didn't pursue them. He didn't need to. Tanya released a long, deep breath. I anticipated an attempt. They will not, Roderick stated calmly. Not tonight. A few feet away, the teenage cashier, the same one who had averted her gaze previously, was now maneuvering a small cart of returns toward the register. She halted as she passed Roderick. I observe what you did, she said quietly. Roderick turned to her. She looked over at Tanya and her children. I regret not saying anything, she thought. Roderick nodded thoughtfully. You will next time. The girl offered a slight, almost self-conscious smile and departed. She made no attempt to turn back. Tanya looked down at her son. Come on, dear. He clasped her hand, holding tightly onto the cookie pack. Roderick observed them as they walked towards the parking lot, the little girl now fully awake and rubbing her eyes against her mother's shoulder. Tanya glanced back once, their eyes connecting briefly. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a farewell. Simply a silent recognition, genuine and sufficient. He turned to depart, retrieving his overlooked basket, stepping back to do so. Yet, something felt altered. The eggs could wait. So too could the milk. As he walked out into the night, a personal realization sparked within him, a feeling connected to his past that he hadn't considered in years, triggering a memory with unexpected force. Roderick did not go home immediately. He remained in his truck in the parking lot, with the window rolled halfway down, allowing the warm Baton Rouge air to flow in as the sky transitioned from gray to black. The grocery store lights hummed behind him, fluorescent and seemingly without end, stretching long shadows across the parking lot. He gazed forward for a considerable time, his hands resting on the steering wheel, the engine off, not because he anticipated something, simply thinking, dwelling on a weighty feeling. That boy's question, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" repeated in his mind, and the way Tanya had said, "You're the safe place for somebody." He hadn't anticipated either of those sentiments to linger, but they had. The recollection that surfaced wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was subtle and understated. Perhaps that's why it affected him so deeply. He was 10, waiting in line with his mother at a corner store just outside Port Allen. It was summer, and his shoes were 2 sizes too small. His mother had been working 3 part-time jobs since his dad left. On that day, her EBT card malfunctioned. The cashier, a man with a slicked-back mullet, told her to move aside. Publicly. Next, the man announced, "This woman can't pay." Roderick recalled hearing sighs and shuffles from the people trailing behind them. Someone even chuckled. His mother didn't shed any tears. She simply stood, attempting to understand where things had gone amiss. Her hands had shaken as she entered the numbers on the keypad. Her gaze remained fixed on the screen, as though intense focus might somehow resolve the issue. A man in a gray work shirt, a stranger standing behind them, moved forward and paid. He did so silently, without a word or explanation, simply sliding a 20 across the counter as if it were inconsequential. Roderick also remembered the man's boots. They were scuffed. The clothes were soiled, as if he'd worn them for years. His mother expressed her gratitude 3 times. The man simply replied, "It's all right," and departed. Roderick never forgot that. Not because of the money, but because for one moment someone chose to prevent his mom from feeling insignificant. And now, all these years later, he'd unknowingly become that man. He leaned back in his seat and rubbed his hands over his face. "Safe place for somebody," he muttered, half to himself. He hadn't always gotten it right. There had been moments he remained silent when he ought to have spoken, instances where he averted his gaze. But tonight he did not, and that felt significant, not a resolution, but a beginning. He reached into the glove compartment and retrieved the small notebook where he recorded grocery lists and budget details. He turned to the rear, located a vacant page, and penned 3 words. Speak. Stand. Stay. He wasn't certain why he wrote them that way, but it felt correct. Like a prompting, like a key. A collection of teenagers in hoodies walked by his truck, laughing and jostling each other, having just left the store with Slurpees and bags of chips. One of them made eye contact and offered a brief nod of recognition. It wasn't elaborate, just a quick movement of the chin. Roderick returned the gesture subtly. He started the engine. The radio began playing softly, featuring an old Otis Redding song. He allowed it to play for a minute before lowering the volume. As he continued his journey, he observed a city bus stop where a mother and her daughter waited, illuminated by the weak light of a street lamp. The young girl rested against her mom's shoulder, seemingly dozing. Roderick reduced his speed as he rounded the bend. That scene also resonated with him. He thought of so many mothers in this area, striving to manage everything, holding on with worn-out resources, and bearing the burden of groceries, children, and societal expectations as if it were simply an obligation. Sadly, they often go unnoticed. He drove into his driveway, turned off the truck, and paused for a moment. But prior to entering the house, he reviewed the notebook one last time, making a silent vow that would resonate well into the future. Roderick stood on his porch beneath a wavering light bulb. The screen door groaned as he opened it. Inside, the modest house held the scent of aged timber and laundry detergent. Lainey was curled up on the couch under a blanket, a textbook resting on her knees and a pencil in her mouth. She looked up as he entered. "You're gone forever," she said. He dropped his keys onto the side table. "Yeah, I ran into something unexpected." "Like what?" Roderick hesitated. She asked it so casually, unaware that her uncle had just been standing between a mother and two grown men poised to overwhelm her regarding a shopping trip. How would you explain that to a 12-year-old so it doesn't feel overwhelming? "I witnessed someone being treated unfairly." I said something. Lainey looked at him. "Did you argue with him?" He chuckled, sounding weary. "No, it wasn't necessary." "Did it make a difference?" He nodded. "It did." Lainey returned to her book, as if that was a sufficient explanation, but Roderick remained standing. He found himself repeatedly recalling Tanya's expression, or her son's inquiry, or the realization that for a brief period that grocery store had served as a learning experience, not only for a frightened little boy or a weary young mother, but for all those within hearing distance, and for him. Roderick had previously believed that demonstrating courage meant confronting situations directly and forcefully, that unless it involved a significant display, it was inconsequential. However, tonight brought a shift in perspective. As his actions were met with silence rather than recognition, they did not become a popular topic. No phones were used. There were no news reports, no widely shared videos. Just a mother, a child, and a man who chose to act instead of remaining silent. Perhaps that's what the world needs, discreet actions that have a subtle impact. Ordinary individuals who recognize an injustice and voice their concerns, prioritizing integrity over apathy. He entered the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. His hands remained stiff. He didn't notice until he placed the cup on the counter. Lainey's lunchbox sat on the counter. He opened it, almost automatically, to see if she's left anything behind. Inside, he found a half-eaten apple and a note he's written her earlier that morning. "You got this. I'm proud of you." He paused, looking at it. 4 short words on a sticky note. "And she's kept it." That affected him more than he anticipated, because it reminded him that words don't need to be forceful to resonate. They don't have to be flawless to be significant. He returned to the living room, settled beside Lainey, and observed the math homework she was finding difficult. "Do you need some help?" she offered, silently passing him a pencil. While they solved the problems together, he looked at her. This small, brilliant, stubborn girl, unaware of how frequently the world would challenge her and how vital it would be to advocate for those unable to do so themselves. He wished she would retain this memory of him. He wanted her to recognize someone who championed another person, unrelated and undeserving of such action, yet still in need of protection. That's the essence of strength he hoped she'd see. After finishing the final problem, Lainey looked up and said, "You're like one of the good guys, huh?" Roderick smiled. A genuine smile this time, he tried to convey. She nodded, seeming pleased. "Good." A silence fell between them. The television hummed softly in the background. A dog barked once from somewhere beyond, then fell silent. Roderick relaxed against the couch, allowing the stillness to descend. He wasn't obligated to act as a bodyguard. He simply needed to demonstrate that he cared. And for this evening, that was sufficient. Should you ever witness someone facing unjust treatment and feel compelled to intervene, Honor that impulse. Offer a word. Take action. Even minor deeds hold significance. They instruct. They safeguard. They are important. If this narrative resonated with you, even slightly, please share it. Perhaps someone else needs to read this today. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Real stories like this deserve to be shared.